February 15th, 2023 meeting of the City of Eugene Budget Committee at 5:32 p.m. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight in this remote meeting format. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the City of Eugene Budget Committee webpage. For those who are joining the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. There is public comment tonight in the agenda. Comments should be limited exclusively to the capital improvement program. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the blue hand icon, or for those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. We will continue accepting raised hands until 5:40 p.m. The meeting moderator will unraise or disallow any requests to speak that are made after the deadline. The capital improvement program is the main focus of this meeting. Due to our limited amount of time and tight agenda, comments and questions, again, should be limited to agenda items. We have several future, 5 additional meetings coming up that will provide more time to discuss the city's financial condition and proposed budget more broadly. I also want to acknowledge that it is a privilege to participate in these meetings. I encourage everyone here tonight to remember throughout our proceedings that many of the people who may be affected most by the decisions we make here are also often the least able to participate. So please keep that in mind as we deliberate. And now I want to take a moment to allow each member of our committee to introduce themselves in the randomized order that staff has provided for our later round robin, starting with Ryan Moore.
Are we doing any icebreakers or just name?
Just name and citizen member, counselor, etc.
Ryan Moore, citizen member, he, him, his pronouns.
Welcome. Thank you, Ryan. Counselor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. Randy Groves, Eugene City Councilor, Ward 8.
Thank you. And Counselor Zelenka.
Alan Zelenka, City Councilor, the ward around the University of Oregon. 3.
Thank you. Raina Jackson.
Hi, you all. Raina Jackson, citizen member. Always like to give the caveat, this door could open at any time with kiddos rushing in.
We're happy when that happens. And it doesn't look like Councilor Clark is here. Zach Mulholland.
Hello, Zach Mulholland, citizen member, he, him, his pronouns.
Thank you. And I misread my own list. Eliza Kaczynski.
Eliza Kaczynski, citizen member.
Thank you. And Councilor Leach, welcome to your first Budget Committee meeting.
Thank you. I'm Lindsay Leach, City Councilor for Ward 7.
Thank you. I'm not seeing the next person, the next 2 on the list. One was expected. Siobhan Cancel.
Hi, Siobhan Cancel, use she, her pronouns, and I'm a citizen member.
Thank you. Councilor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. Matt Keating, Eugene City Council, Ward 2, South Eugene.
Thank you. Ryan Kanowski.
Ryan Kanowski, citizen member, he, him pronouns.
Thank you. I am Ty Bruce Zimmerman, committee chair, he, him pronouns, and I'm in Ward 6. And we also have Mayor Vinnis here as a guest.
Lucy Vinnis, Mayor of Eugene.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We are now prepared to begin public comment on the 2023 to 2029 proposed capital improvement program. Those wishing to speak during public comment must have virtually raised their hand. The period to do so is ending in 3 minutes. I'm trying to kill that time. The meeting moderator will unraise or disallow any request to speak after that time. Comments should be focused on the CIP at this time. Again, if a commenter does veer off track on that and start commenting on something other than the CIP, staff will end that commentary and move on to the next person on the list. There will be time at future Budget Committee meetings for more general budget comments. The meeting moderator will announce the next 2 speakers at a time. When it is your turn, your name will be announced and the microphone will be unmuted. Please preface your statement with your name, city of residence, and for Eugene residents, your ward if known. You'll have 3 minutes to comment. There are lights on the timer. The yellow light indicates you have 30 seconds remaining. When your time is concluded, the moderator will mute your microphone and move on to the next speaker. For those who have connected to the meeting via phone and don't have the benefit of seeing the timer, please be aware that your microphone will be muted when your time expires. Do we have a list of speakers?
Hello, Go ahead, Liz.
Hi. We have 2 people currently signed up for public comment, starting with Lynn Woodrich, followed by John Borowski. Lynn, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Oop. That's better. My name's Lynn Woodrich. I'm the co-chair of the Active Bethel Community, ABC. I'm living in Ward 6 now and own a home in the Bethel portion of Ward 8. We need your support of biking and walking projects in Bethel. The ABC board has communicated with you about the need for specific biking and walking projects in our community, but unfortunately, they're not currently included in the draft capital improvement plan for 2023 to 2029 that you're discussing and voting on tonight. The last CIP from 2 years ago also didn't name any biking and walking projects in Bethel. Bethel needs a safe connection from the Bethel Community Park to the Checkermellow access of the West Eugene wetlands as part of a connection from the west end of the Jessen Path to the west end wetlands via Ohio Street and Meadowview School. Another project that ABC has previously voiced support for is a path to Fern Ridge from the West Eugene wetlands, a farm belt heading north and then east to the Willamette River. Green Hill Road from Clear Lake Road to Highway 126 also needs a bike path. ABC has also submitted petitions to Logan Tellis, the Assistant Transportation Planner, for inclusion of speed bumps on Golden Garden Street. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have John Borowski, who is our last speaker scheduled for public comment tonight. Thank you. John, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself. John, are you there? Can you hear us?
There we go. You got me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Zimmerman and Budget Committee members. My name is John Borowski and I reside in Ward 3. I would like to thank you all for your work in helping staff develop not only our budget, but this capital improvement program. I believe this is a well-developed CIP and it should get moved forward to the City Council for adoption. However, going forward, there are some things that I think would need to be addressed in upcoming CIPs, and those would be the qualifying criteria. The qualifying criteria for this is on your AIS on page 13, and it is based on plans, council approved policies and goals, and there's several of them throughout the CIP that staff uses to develop the CIP. But one area that I think is lacking and might want to go into the next iteration of the capital improvement program is economic development. I know the mayor brought this up at her State of the City as a goal moving forward. And I think that would be a good criteria to add to the qualifying criteria for the CIP. I'm just going to give you an example of where I think it could be used. Recently, the city expanded its urban growth boundary by several hundred acres for employment. This is out the Clear Lake Road area. Yet it's not being served right now by infrastructure, either stormwater, wastewater, or those types of things. There's a lot of communities out there that are looking to bring in jobs to their communities. And one of the things that they look for is buildable land and access to infrastructure. So I think that by not having economic development as one of the criteria that we look to is something that should be thought of going forward. And I'll give you another example. One of the criteria that is looked at and policies that is looked at when developing the CIP is the housing implementation pipeline. We know we need housing in this community. We have a policy, the HIP, that is sending us down that road, and it is being used to develop infrastructure to help get housing built. I believe that that is a template for what we could use for economic development and developing some of our lands that we have brought in for jobs. So I think moving forward, if staff could think about this, not for this CIP, but maybe future CIPs. Thank you again.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you to our speakers. Wonderful to hear from you. Our next agenda item is a staff presentation on our proposed 2023 to 29 CIP.
Thank you, Ty. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Keisha Edison, Senior Financial Analyst in Central Finance. With me today are Jennifer Willard, the City Engineer, and Jeff Perry, our Public Buildings and Facilities Director. I'll kick off today's presentation with an overview of the Capital Improvement Program, and then I'll turn it over to Jeff and Jennifer to give some detail about their respective program areas. The CIP is a multi-year planning document that serves as a roadmap for the city's capital projects for fiscal years 24 to 29. It is also a budget document. Once it is approved, these projects become the city's capital budget for the next 2 fiscal years. Capital projects are resource intensive and require significant advanced planning to execute. A multi-year capital plan is considered best practice for local governments, and the CIP process helps us connect our spending with our goals and the community's needs. You may have noted that the CIP title does not match previous year's naming conventions. This CIP still spans the same forward-looking 6-year period as previous CIPs, but the title has been revised to align with our new biennial budget nomenclature. As such, the 2023-2029 CIP is the basis of the 2023-2025 capital budget. This diagram shows the basic process by which a project goes from idea to construction to use. Throughout the process, there are multiple sources of input that inform city staff on the needs and desires of the community and drive forward the capital planning process. Beginning in the upper left corner, a capital need is first identified and then analyzed through a variety of planning and modeling efforts. These efforts are typically documented through master plans, and depending on how the information is generated for the plan or how the plan is to be used, these plans may be developed with engagement from the public and council. For example, the Transportation System Plan had extensive public engagement due to the wide-ranging implications to city policies, regulations, and project priorities. In the next step of the planning process, more detailed project plans are made in collaboration with engineering and design teams, partner agencies, and input from the community. Funding options, including qualifying grant opportunities, are also identified in this phase. Once funding and project plans are in place, the The CIP is compiled and presented to the Budget Committee. This creates another opportunity for members of the public to weigh in, both in public comment and in feedback from the citizen members of this committee. Once the City Council approves the CIP in March, the capital projects therein receive appropriation authority through the budget process. And then finally, after budget adoption, the next phase of planning, design, and building can begin. We are continuing to dial in on GHG, project-specific, and operating cost reporting. All of these initiatives were implemented in the last 2 CIPs, answering requests from Budget Committee and City Council to increase transparency in the capital program. In the FY25 CIP, GHG reporting was added to meet goals of the Climate Recovery Ordinance. This year's CIP continues to improve upon GHG emission estimates for capital projects. A total of approximately 40,000 GHGs are currently estimated to result from construction of projects in the 2023-2029 CIP. GHG emission details can be found within the document. Additionally, more project-specific reporting, as opposed to project buckets, was implemented in previous CIPs in order to increase transparency. This year's CIP continues that effort with a total of 128 projects and programs identified. Finally, in the table to the right, you will see that the total additional operating costs estimated in this CIP come to approximately $3.6 million. We attempt to estimate these costs where possible to improve future budget planning, as well as communication with you and our community. In many cases, projects in the CIP are in early phase development, and estimating operating costs at this time is not possible. Such cost estimates are expected to appear in future CIPs and budgets. This chart shows how the requested CIP funds are divided into 6 program areas. Our total CIP capital request equals $310.7 million. This does not include the $3.65 million in expected operating costs associated with the projects in the CIP that was shown on the previous slide. You will note that the airport has the largest portion of the CIP, with 13 projects totaling almost $147 million. Transportation is the second largest program area, with 32 projects totaling $94.3 million. Of note, airport and transportation also account for the majority of estimated GHG emissions from project construction. This chart depicts the funding status of CIP projects across different areas. The dark blue bars indicate where funding is identified. These are projects with a likelihood of receiving available funding, such as grants, systems development charges, and donations. This funding status category makes up about 78%, or $243 million of the CIP. The light blue portions are projects with secured or dedicated funding, such as stormwater and wastewater user fees, bond funding, and transfers from operating funds. This funding status category makes up 22%, or $67 million of the CIP. Our capital projects are funded in a multitude of ways. This graph shows the variety of funding sources for the over $310 million in anticipated capital funding. As you can see, the Airport Construction Fund is by far the largest source of funding for the CIP. This fund is supported by airport revenues, and it's important to note that no general fund capital is required for airport projects in the CIP. Our second and third largest funding sources are grants from the FAA and other federal funding. This pie chart shows capital projects by project categories. Category definitions are included in the capital budget overview section of the budget document. The current CIP mostly consists of projects in the new capital facilities and preservation and maintenance categories. New capital facilities is the largest category in terms of dollars requested. Most of that funding will be directed towards airport projects, while the largest number of projects in the category are for parks and open space projects. Preservation and maintenance is our second largest category and consists primarily of transportation projects, but also has notable numbers of wastewater and facility projects. Now I'm going to turn things over to Jeff Perry, our Facilities Director, to talk about public buildings and facilities capital projects in the new CIP.
All right, thanks, Keisha. Let's jump to the next slide. So I'm here to review the CIP for public buildings and facilities projects. The city maintains and preserves a wide variety of public facilities, including community centers, swimming pools, parking structures, public safety facilities, park restrooms, historic buildings, the Holt Center, and the Eugene Public Library. This represents over 200 buildings and structures totaling approximately 2 million square feet. In addition to preservation and maintenance, the city also plans for and constructs new and expanded facilities to meet the growing needs of our community. The general fund is the primary source of funding for the preservation and maintenance of public buildings and facilities, with major renovations and new buildings coming from dedicated or external sources, such as the recent Parks and Recreation Bond and ARPA funds. Next slide, please. Public buildings and facility projects are developed from multiple adopted plans, facility condition reports, and feedback from customers and facility maintenance staff. Some of the plans that guide our work include the Parks and Rec System Plan, the Facility Condition Database, the Parking Structure Condition Analysis, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and LEED certification for major construction projects. Go to the next slide. Capital improvement projects for general fund public facilities fall under the following categories. New capital facilities. Projects in this category typically provide for either new or replacement of facilities or projects that help expand existing services and are of such a scale to warrant classification as standalone projects. Large-scale facility changes that are needed to provide for community growth are found in this category of projects. Facility preservation and maintenance. These projects preserve, maintain, and repair systems associated with existing facilities and are split into 6 preservation and maintenance program areas that include annual exterior preservation and maintenance, annual flooring and interior upgrades, hazardous remediation, parking lot and pavement maintenance, small roofing projects, contingency, and emergency projects. General site and facility improvements. Projects in this category include modifications or additions of existing facilities to meet operational, safety, and cost efficiency goals and to comply with the ADA. The primary goal of this program is to address changing program functions and needs or to improve service delivery. These type of projects have limited impact on facility operation costs as their purpose is to upgrade or reconfigure space for more effective service delivery. Each fiscal year, our internal facilities board helps prioritize our upcoming facility improvement projects. Projects approved by the board for FY23 include security upgrades and fencing improvements at Fire Station 6 and a number of community centers. Let's go to the CIP funding slide. The CIP includes approximately $8 million allocated for specific projects and structure project and building and structure projects, sorry. A little over 25% of the projects are funded with general capital project dollars. You might notice that the total amount is much lower than the last CIP, which is primarily due to the completion of the bond-funded recreation facility projects. Next, I'll talk about some of the specific CIP projects our team has completed and will be working on in the upcoming biennium. Roofing replacement are some of the most critical projects we work on, and often the most expensive since failures and water penetration can cause catastrophic damage to buildings and equipment. Every CIP includes numerous roof projects, and this CIP is no different. Here's a photo of the Holt Center slope roof, which is scheduled to be replaced within the next couple of years. This is actually a very exciting project since it will include some architectural and design considerations since the iconic roof is so unique. ARPA funds have been leveraged to move this project forward, along with roofing replacement at the Eugene Public Library and Fire Station 1. Several general fund projects are also scheduled to be completed, including replacement of the roofs at Fire Station 10 and the facility's main office. Next slide. Several HVAC upgrade projects are scheduled to be completed within the next CIP, including Fire Station 10, the Second and Chambers Training Facility, the Ed Coleman Center, Boys and Girls Club, and Peterson Barn Community Center. Consistent with our climate recovery goals, each project will look for opportunities to improve efficiency, eliminate the use of fossil fuels, perform better, and reduce operation and maintenance costs. Many of these projects include replacement of R22, a refrigerant known to be harmful to the environment. While our current strategy moves away from R22 to a less harmful product, the industry is changing, and new legislation is expected to be introduced soon. Facilities and city staff have been engaged with other public agencies and stakeholders on the subject to help determine the best approach going forward. One area of the building and infrastructure CIP is responsible for, which is not always obvious, is parking lot preservation and maintenance. Several paving projects are scheduled to be completed, including repairs at Echo Hollow Pool and repairs and parking expansion at the EPD headquarters facility. You can see that in the slide above. We'll go to the next slide. Several large exterior repair projects were completed in the last CIP, including the Second and Chambers Training Facility, pictured above, Graham Field House, and the historic Sheldon McMurphy Johnson House. This is the photo of the repairs that took place at Second Chambers last year, which has now been completed. SMJ House was also recently completed, which was a very complex project requiring a different method of contracting where the contractor managed both the design and construction process. The Eugene Police Department headquarters building has been designated for extensive siding repairs and window replacement in the upcoming CIP. Next slide. Over the last several years, Facilities has worked closely with the Recreation Division on 3 major renovation projects, which include Campbell Community Center, Echo Hollow Pool, and most recently, Sheldon Pool. All 3 projects have been completed, are now open to the public. The projects expanded each facility, increased program and aquatic space, and included needed capital repairs and energy efficiency upgrades, which resulted in substantial GHG reductions at both pools. All 3 projects achieved LEED Silver accreditation as well. While the recreation construction projects have been completed, work has been underway to acquire property in the Churchill area for a potential multi-use community center and aquatics facility. 7 acres of vacant land has been purchased directly west of Manny Reynolds Park as a possible future site. Next slide. Capital funds are often utilized to not only preserve and maintain building assets, but to reduce ongoing operational costs. In addition to energy efficiency upgrades, such as LED lighting conversions, projects are also completed that help reduce maintenance and maximize the useful life of new building systems. To help identify these projects, Facilities utilizes a work order system that tracks building maintenance requests and recurring issues that can require more time and effort for staff to address. As an example, a study and design work are scheduled to be completed for Amazon Pool to install a hydroza finish on the pool shell. This is a more durable finish that has been used at both Echo Hollow Pool and Sheldon Pool. While the upfront cost to apply the finish will be more expensive, the life cycle cost will be substantially lower since we will no longer need to repaint the pool every few years. Downtime for annual maintenance and impact of pool patrons will also be reduced. Meeting the Climate Recovery Ordinance goals is a priority for the Capital Budget and Facilities Division. The 2016 Solar Energy Group Study, which identified several paths to meet CRO goals related to the operations of city buildings, is currently in the process of being updated to reflect our progress and to make recommendations on additional efforts. Current strategies have included LED lighting upgrades, retro commissioning building systems, and fuel switching HVAC systems from natural gas to electricity to help reduce the use of fossil fuels. I might add there that all of our projects are always, we always consider natural gas fuel switching for all of our HVAC projects that we work on. The CIP includes $1 million towards CRO projects over the biennium. Included in the CIP is the Roosevelt Yard campus, which houses parks and open space and public works maintenance, including fleet services and traffic operations. Many of the buildings were constructed as early as 1955 and need to be replaced due to building condition, growing operational needs, and seismic resiliency. In fact, a large number of the buildings currently in use are repurposed parking bays that have been converted to office and meeting space. Master planning work is underway to determine long-term facility needs for the Public Works campus. The fleet facility is one of the higher priorities given that it directly supports and maintains public safety vehicles and equipment. Several grants have also been applied for, which could help with facilities planning and capital costs. The photo above is the fleet facility. As you've likely heard, the city is in the process of negotiating the purchase of the eWeb headquarters facility to be used as a city hall. The facility was constructed in 1988 and includes roughly 100,000 square feet of office and meeting space. Facility staff are currently evaluating the building to determine its condition and any maintenance and repair needs. So far, we've learned that the building has received multiple repairs and upgrades in recent years, such as modernization of the elevators and HVAC system. Potential projects necessary to move into the facility include painting, carpet replacement, some building system changes such as access control and security upgrades, restroom improvements, ADA upgrades, and most significantly, renovations to the north building to accommodate the council chamber and work session meeting rooms. Overall, the building is in good condition considering its age. Future CIP projects may include energy efficiency upgrades such as LED lighting replacement, digital building controls, and HVAC improvements targeted at reducing energy and natural gas use. A key indicator we track in our database is the Facility Condition Index, or FCI, to determine a building's overall condition. A lower FCI percentage represents a building that's in better condition, and a high FCI usually means the facility is in need of repairs or improvements. Our goal is to maintain a good FCI rating, which means only 15% of the facility is in need of some minor renovations or repairs. The pie chart in this slide represents all general fund facilities. And as you can see, slightly less than 2/3 have a good FCI and about 1/3 rate is fair. This chart represents deficiencies by distress. Almost 75% of our total deficiencies are because the system is beyond its projected service life. Due to proactive preservation and maintenance practices, we're able to extend the useful life of many of the building systems that are beyond service life, which helps reduce long-term capital investment costs. It's been about 5 years since our last complete buildings and structure condition assessment. We're currently planning to update the condition database and software system in the upcoming CIP, so the charts will likely look different during the next CIP presentation. I'll now hand it over to Jennifer to discuss Public Works projects.
All right, good evening. So I'm Jennifer Willer. I'm the city engineer and I am the Public Works Engineering Division Manager. And there are 5 CIP service areas in Public Works that I'll be providing an overview of this evening. So airport, parks and open space, stormwater, transportation, and wastewater. Next slide. There are a number of plans that influence the work that we do here in selecting projects for Public Works. These are a number of the kind of general citywide plans that are used, as well as a few specific plans that are used in Public Works. And as we go through some of the different service areas, I'll add some more plans and guides that are specific to those programs as well. Next slide. So in each of those 5 service areas, I'm going to do an overview of, like I said, specific guidance or plans for that service area. I'll talk a little bit about funding sources for each service area, climate action and sustainability work that we're doing in that. And then I'll do some example projects and programs. If you've looked through the CIP, you see that it's pretty lengthy for the Public Works project. So I'm going to do some overviews of either some example projects or things that are fairly significant that are coming up in each program area, but I won't necessarily touch on every project or program that we are going to cover. Next slide. So the airport portion of the CIP includes 12 projects and 1 program. Next slide. The priorities are primarily determined through a process described in the airport master plan and FAA approval. But you can see that there's a number of plans and guides that are used to support or identify and prioritize projects. Next slide. As Keisha noted earlier, airport funding is fully supported by airport revenue, fees, and grants. And this is primarily through the Airport Construction Fund and the Federal Aviation Administration. And as Keisha also noted, this is the largest dollar-wise of the CIP of the service areas. For the climate action, there are a few things that the airport is doing. I would say for ongoing wise, the airport continues to look for sustainable construction techniques and materials to incorporate into all their projects. And there are definitely some future opportunities based on the airport's participation in the zero or low emissions roadmap process that I believe that I talked about at the last CIP a couple years ago, that Eugene Airport was selected to be part of a study group for airports looking at reducing emissions. Then the images that I'm showing here are from the Advanced Terminal Planning Study, which is a 2022 document that look at the variety of things that the airport is looking at to reduce our impact on the environment at the airport. Next slide. The airport projects can really be summarized mostly in a couple of different categories: rehabilitation and preservation, and then new capital facilities. So this is the list of projects that are in the rehabilitation and preservation category. And you can see that there's a variety of upgrade and rehabilitation projects for existing facilities in this list. Next slide. For new capital facilities, primarily it's made up of the terminal building Concourse C addition. And these project costs that are in here are preliminary and are expected to increase as the planning process progresses. I also want to note here that there is a council presentation scheduled for February 22nd on the airport terminal study. Next slide. So parks and open space. So the parks portion of the CIP includes 21 projects and programs. The Parks and Recreation Master Plan is really kind of the primary driver for identifying priorities for parks projects, in addition to applicable funding requirements. So for example, if there were a bond or something like that, that would identify which project should be included in the CIP. It is my understanding, though, that the POSE bond is not shown in this proposed CIP, as the projects that were included in the 2017 bond have already been budgeted in earlier CIP and budget actions. I think that was a question that somebody had earlier. Next slide. So parks projects are funded from a variety of sources, with the largest source being Parks SDCs. And this is where you can see that there isn't the 2017 bond funding that's in this current CIP, since those projects have already been budgeted. And the projects for parks projects, I selected really upgrades and capacity enhancements as, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. This is the climate action sustainability slide. So the parks projects continue to look for ways to make improvements to park irrigation. So reducing the amount of water and being more efficient with the water usage, upgrading lighting from old, more electric intensive lighting to LEDs, which are safer and use less energy, looking for ways to improve green infrastructure, either by adding it or making it more efficient to maintain it, as well as renovating parks for more efficient operations and maintenance. Some future opportunities that were identified are to continue to implement the Parks and Recreation System Plan with needed renovations and preservation, increasing the tree planting program, and then continuing to look for more sustainable and less greenhouse intensive construction methods and materials. Next slide. So this is where we get into the categories of projects. So there's two primary categories for projects in the parks CIP. The first is upgrades and capacity enhancements. So there's a variety of master planning and renovation projects, as well as increase to the street tree stocking and planting section of the CIP this go around. Next slide. The other project category that is significant is new capital facilities. So the big one is to develop the Riverfront Plaza in downtown, as well as a number of other new facilities that are planned for parks projects. Next slide. The next category is stormwater. And in the stormwater category, the CIP includes 30 projects and programs. And while there's a number of plans that are listed here, priorities are primarily driven by regulatory requirements and permits that the city holds that ensure clean water standards are met by our community. Next slide. So the stormwater portion of the CIP is primarily funded by stormwater utility, which is from the fees that residents and businesses pay in the city of Eugene towards their stormwater. Next slide. And on the climate action side, we have continued to build on the dry well elimination program. So this is replacing dry wells that directly drain stormwater from streets into groundwater. And so we're looking for ways to eliminate that so that we can treat that water first before it is infiltrated into the ground or goes into our stormwater system otherwise. We are making progress on doing stream restoration projects, so naturalizing channels or addressing repairs that are needed to open channels that have had problems or failures. And then also just continuing to rehabilitate the existing stormwater system to address leakages and other things that cause increased maintenance and operation costs. Some future opportunities in stormwater program are to continue to be strategic in selection of the project. So we continue to dial that in to find where can we make the most cost-effective and efficient repairs to our system to get the most kind of bang for our buck. Continuing to build on what we call low income or low impact development, where we look for opportunities for green infrastructure instead of hardscaping and putting in more pipe in the ground. And then looking for ways to enhance the vegetation that we do plant so that it's more easily maintained and will flourish more in our area and the systems that we're using that vegetation in. Next slide. So the project categories that I found to be primarily in the CIP, the first is upgrades and capacity enhancements. So this is retrofits and improvements made to existing facilities so that they work better and can actually carry more stormwater or be more efficient to maintain. And so there's a variety of those projects. And then the other project category is functional and safety improvements. So these are projects, again, that they are existing facilities, but there's been failures, or they've deteriorated from age or climate, and they just are presenting either safety, or they're just not working well anymore and they need to be improved. So you can see that there's quite a long list of projects that fall into that category as well. Next slide. So the transportation program, this program includes, the service area includes 36 projects and programs. Next slide. And there are a variety of guides and plans that help us select and prioritize transportation projects. But I would say that most project priorities are identified from the transportation system plan and from the street repair bond measure that was passed by voters in 2017. And I will note for this CIP that FY24 and 25 are the last years of the 2017 bond, and that the bond measure that was passed by voters in 2022 is not in this draft CIP, since we started drafting it before the bond was actually passed. The transportation system, the funding comes from a variety of sources. The largest source is actually federal funds that we receive either through our Metropolitan Planning Organization process, or in the case of this CIP, we received a large grant from the federal government through the RAISE program for Franklin Boulevard, which is a significant portion of that piece of the pie. The next largest portion is Payment Preservation Capital, which is the local City of Eugene gas tax that goes entirely to capital preservation. Next slide. So on climate action and sustainability in the transportation system, the program continues to focus on multimodal and safety projects, as well as pavement preservation strategies and techniques. So looking for ways to make sure we preserve existing infrastructure before it fails and becomes more costly to not only just maintain, but to actually reconstruct it. And then also looking for ways to improve traffic operations and signals, again, not only just to make it easier to operate and maintain, but also so that our transportation systems function more efficiently and safer for the people that are using it. Future opportunities in the transportation program are to continue to refine how we select projects, continuing to look for ways to divert waste from landfilling and using more sustainable construction techniques and materials on our projects. We have been increasing tree planting on our capital projects, working with Parks and Open Space to identify areas where we can plant trees where they will, again, flourish in the area, as well as address areas of town that traditionally have been underplanted with street trees. And then also growing our intelligent transportation systems, which again is traffic operations and signals, so that we not only get a safer system, but one that just works better for everybody who's using it. Next slide. So on transportation service area, there's actually 3 categories of projects that make up most of the projects here. The first is functional and safety projects. So similar to when I talked about with the stormwater program, these are existing facilities that just aren't working the way that they should be working. And so we have identified projects here to make those function better as well as be safer. And so there's a lot of intersection improvements in here, as well as, and all of these projects that are listed here include grant funding to fund these projects. And then the local funds are used for matching those grants. And then the other two categories, one is upgrades and capacity enhancement. These are, so Franklin Boulevard transformation and the River Road Santa Clara bike and pedestrian bridge, again, grant projects. These are two very significant grant projects. There's a lot of federal grant money that we've received for those, and then we use local city funds to match those grants. Most of our grant projects have somewhere between a 10 to 20% local match required for those funds. So that's the way that we leverage our local funds to go further than we could if we just had to use our local funds on these projects. The third significant category of projects is preservation and maintenance, and this is where a lot of those local gas tax and street repair bond projects that are preserving our existing pavements and streets fall into. And then it also includes the local street repairs and slurry seal project, which is funded with local gas taxes and addresses some preservation needs on our very lowest volume local neighborhood streets. And then the final service area that I'm covering here tonight is wastewater. And the wastewater program includes 8 projects and programs and priorities. Oh, next slide. And priorities are primarily driven by the wastewater master plan, which is, the goal is to reduce the infiltration and inflow into the system. So that's like groundwater and stormwater that finds its way through cracks and openings into our wastewater system and will impact the capacity of those pipes, but then also eventually gets down into our wastewater treatment plant and results in us having to potentially treat water that we wouldn't otherwise have to treat. So our program is primarily focused on reducing that, as well as reducing maintenance that's needed to these pipes due to the age and deterioration. And all of that is outlined in the wastewater master plan, and it helps us, as well as a model that's tied to that, to help us identify the worst in the city so that we can get the most bang for our buck in reducing those that deterioration, or what we call I&I, into the system. One of the new plans to our CIP, and specifically in the wastewater service area, is the housing implementation pipeline. And it specifically had an action item in it to include a wastewater project to support housing needs. And so we do have that included in this CIP. So the wastewater program is primarily funded by wastewater utility, which these are the wastewater fees that residents and businesses pay for the city of Eugene. And the second is wastewater SDCs, also are a significant funding source for this program. And for climate action and sustainability, the program has continued to look for ways to reduce wasting existing materials and having projects that have more intensive or disruptive construction. So this is where we do a lot of work on lining existing pipes rather than digging it up and replacing it. That really is the focus of our program. And but the future opportunities are that we continue to refine that wastewater model so that we can continue to find more efficient, more targeted in the areas that we line and treat to reduce that groundwater and stormwater that's leaking into our system. Slide. So for the wastewater program, like I said, this program is primarily driven by rehabilitation projects, primarily pipe, which is the lining of those projects, but we also have pump station rehabilitation projects, which are replacing older inefficient pumps or other mechanical systems in the pump stations with newer ones. And for the what we call trenchless pipe rehabilitation or lining projects, we're estimating in the first 2 years of the CIP that we will get to about 41,000 feet of pipe, and that includes all of the associated manholes and laterals in the right-of-way will also be lined or rehabilitated. So it's a pretty significant program. Next slide. And then this is the project that was identified to support the housing implementation pipeline, the West 11th and Crow Road wastewater extension project. Engineering worked with planning and community development to look at a variety of projects that are in the wastewater master plan as potential extensions, and did an analysis comparing whether the area it has interest or is ripe for development based on what kind of outreach planning and community development have heard between builders and developers, as well as how many housing units can we get for the amount of money that we're spending. And this project came out at the top as far as having a potential for over 1,200 housing units, over 500 commercial jobs, and over 350 industrial jobs for the about $2 million project that's in the CIP. And that is the last of the public works service areas.
Thank you, Jennifer and Jeff, and thank you all for your attention today. To recap what you have just seen and heard, the proposed CIP requests a total of $310.7 million in capital spending over the next 6 years. City staff has continued to improve upon GHG reporting where possible and has identified 128 individual projects or programs for the CIP. Also, this year, staff has identified about $3.6 million in added operational costs as a result of the capital projects included. As we look at our process timeline, tonight the Budget Committee will make a recommendation to Council regarding the proposed CIP. Council will then meet in mid-March to hold a public hearing and take action. Later this spring, the adopted CIP will serve as the basis of our capital program in the proposed 2023-2025 biennial budget. Finally, I want to say thank you to City of Eugene staff who worked to put this document together. There have been many contributors from divisions across the city who worked hard to make this process seamless and the CIP as complete and transparent as possible. Thank you all for your time and attention this evening. And now if there are any questions, staff will be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Does anyone have any specific questions on the presentation? Remember, we have deliberation coming up next, but if there's any direct presentation questions, now's a great time for Zach.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation and just all of the staff work that went into this proposal, as well as thanks to the members of the public that came and spoke. With regards to HVAC replacement, you mentioned there's decisions made between electric versus gas. Have those decisions already been made regarding the upcoming HVAC replacements, and how are those decisions made, and is there cost benefit analyses that are available regarding those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, every HVAC project, like a new construction project, will be a fuel switching project. And so they're really the ones that would be in the CIP that would be some decision point. It wouldn't even be a decision point. We would just, it's part of our policy, internal we're fuel switching whenever the opportunity's there. But the current CIP really, a lot of those HVAC upgrades are not, they're heat pumps already. And so it's not necessarily eliminating natural gas on those. They're just converting to a more efficient heat pump system. So that's what you saw in some of those, like with the R22. Those are all just a conversion from electric to more efficient electric.
Okay, so to confirm, none of those are going to be gas systems under those HVAC replacements?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
One other question with regards to the airport and the GHG emission analyses and looking forward to the terminal expansion. Do we include scope 3 emissions in our greenhouse gas analyses? Like, will the terminal expansion, will we be looking at how much that's going to increase air travel capacity and therefore air travel emissions? Or are we just looking at emissions at the airport itself?
Yeah, so those calculations are primarily focused on the embodied greenhouse gas emissions in the construction itself of the facility that's described.
Thank you.
I saw Matt Rodriguez, the Public Works Director, turned on his camera. I didn't know if you wanted to jump in on the answer of that either.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So Matt Rodriguez, Public Works Director. Zach, we do not. So in some ways, so materials, right, are purchasing. So we do include the construction scope 3 when we're looking at the CIP, but we don't include scope 3, for instance, in the airport of what the airlines would be generating as far as greenhouse gas emissions, mostly because we have no control over that. So we are required by the FAA to service whatever airlines and flights want to use our airport. And we're not able to restrict that. So we're really looking at what's within our sphere of control as far as emissions.
So before I jump off this topic, I do want to say that the airport did provide me some information to say that they are regularly talking with the industry experts to ensure that we're going to be ready to offer alternative fuels when they become available and incorporated into airport use, or airline use. So we are definitely continuing to have those conversations to be ready for that switch.
Thank you.
Looks like Ryan Moore, you have a question?
A point and a question. I think it's sort of a larger point that we don't have control over airline emissions in a way, but also airport expansion is basically induced demand, right? The more capacity we add, the more it's going to be used, the more emissions are caused, right? I did have a question about specifically the West 11th and Crow Road slide that was covered, and it's maybe a larger question too. It was mentioned that it should support 1,200 units of housing. I just was hoping to get more detail on what kinds of housing. Are we only planning for single detached housing or multifamily? What's that look like?
So I can get more information to you about that, because those are numbers that planning gave to me based on the projected land use and zoning for that area. And I think the Envision Eugene process identified what the future zoning of. If I remember correctly, I think that is an R2 zoning for that area. Awesome. Along with some commercial and industrial kind of closer to West 11th area.
Yeah. And Mr. Chair, may I ask one more question? I see that I do have a timer, so I'm going to assume yes. With parking lot paving, I know we're constantly looking for more sustainable materials and practices. Have we looked at alternatives to asphalt or like permeable surfaces, that kind of thing?
We haven't actually performed a lot of parking lot maintenance projects over the last 10 years or so. So we certainly will when we take on this project coming up. As I mentioned, there are a couple of them. Echo Hollow Pool is in dire need of some repairs, and the EPD headquarters facility. And so, we have some colleagues on the Zoom meeting here that probably provide some great advice on that front as well. But that'll be part of our consideration during the design process.
Awesome. I know I'm speaking to the experts who know way more than I do about this, but there are some really cool things being done. And parking lots are a major piece of heat island effects. So any way we can get at that, I think will benefit the local communities, especially, Echo Hollow Park, that neighborhood, right? And that's all I've got.
Thank you. Raina.
Hi, thank you. I'm really curious to dig in a little bit more on the Franklin Boulevard Partnership to Rebuild and Revive a Corridor. I'm just curious in regards to the revival and what are the expected gains of economic increase due to this particular project. It seems like it's going to impact businesses, hopefully for the better. But if we have this as our A point and our B point is, yay, revived corridor, what does that look like in terms of the economic development for the city of Eugene?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I don't have the answers for you here this evening, but I know that was a significant portion of the application materials that we turned into U.S. Department of Transportation in order to get the RAISE grant. So there is data in that material, and I can put all that together and provide that to the committee after this meeting.
And just to follow up, thank you for that. What were any anticipated negative impacts to businesses along this corridor?
So we're still pretty early in the conceptual design for this project. We have been talking with all of the business owners along the corridor to work out their access needs and how they operate. But as I said, we're really early still in coming up with the concept for the corridor. And then once we have that concept determined, then we're going to go through and do the NEPA or environmental permitting for the federal funds, as well as really work on those design details where we really get into the weeds with every property owner along that corridor and talk about their access and operations and how we need to accommodate that. But this project is going to have some operational changes to the corridor, and those operational changes are focused on safety and more efficient operations to the corridor. So our hope is that we're going to be of a benefit to everybody along there, whether you're doing business or just traveling through. And I think that there's still a lot of work to work out those individual details with the individual property owners, though.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Kay?
Yeah, thank you. And it's been a while since we've done our questions and then comments, so let me know if this is better for later. But I was just curious about when we talk about confidence in identified funding sources, I'm just curious about what level of confidence do we have? There's probably a wide range, right? Especially if we're going for grants and specific funding sources. So I was just wondering if you could give us a little bit more about, we're in the process, we got the thumbs up already, just waiting on final paperwork, or is it still kind of hopes and dreams?
So I guess I'll take a stab at answering that question, since the transportation program has a lot of grants that we rely on. And so when we show that the funding has been secured, that means that we have a signed funding agreement with the funding agency. the funding identified for grants is that we have been notified that our project has been selected, but we don't have that executed contract yet. So it's very certain, short of having the signed contract that says that we can proceed with the work.
Perfect. That was exactly what I was hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe one more question from Ryan Moore.
I'm so sorry. It's hopefully very fast. So as airport related costs, they're going to increase. That seems obvious. So if we've identified funding, costs may end up going beyond the funding that's identified. How is that handled? Do we pull from general fund? Do we scale back what's planned?
Yeah, so airport was very clear to me that they do not use city general fund to do their capital projects. They rely exclusively on airport revenues and grants. And so, yeah, it really is going to just, and I think this goes for all of the projects probably in the CIP. I'm pretty sure that Jeff would echo this as well, is that, you know, we are in a time that we're seeing a lot of unexpected or rising costs. And so every project is unique in that we have to kind of weigh what is the cost increase from, and is there a way that we can reduce the project or make changes or choose different materials, or the timing of the project. Maybe we phase the project to make, you know, each phase more affordable over time. So it's really unique to each project, but it's definitely something that we're all very much aware of and trying to plan as best we can as we proceed with these projects.
Yeah, and good luck.
You know, I would just add, we also come back during supplemental budget, and you might remember in December when we did supplemental budget, there was a lot of discussion about a couple of airport projects, and that is exactly what happened. Costs went up and we came back on a project that was already under construction to finish that funding, but it was still from airport revenue.
Thank you very much. With that, we are going to move on to our next agenda item, which is a budget committee discussion and deliberation, followed by a recommendation to City Council. I do want to add a clarifying point here, which is that what we are ultimately going to do tonight is vote on recommending the CIP to Council. And what we send to them will also include in their agenda item summary minutes from this meeting. So if anyone here has comments about the CIP beyond just the more granular than the approve, disapprove vote at the end, this is an opportunity during this round robin we're about to have to make those comments, and those will be recorded in the minutes and included in what is sent on to Council. So we're going to use the same order for round robin that we did with the introductions, and I have that in chat as well. So we're starting with Ryan Moore, followed by Councilor Groves.
Sorry, I'm talking so much, as usual. I think there are some motions that I would very much like to have a chance to do some sort of consensus note on. Usually that's done by a vote and recording the results. I think that's a good way to hold a conversation and gather different perspectives. I don't think individual comments recorded in minutes are going to be as effective or persuasive. Is there a way to hold some sort of vote on ideas in this sort of meeting?
We don't have any process set up for anything like that. I've had a number of discussions about hypothetical ways to get there, but only in the last 24 hours have I been having those conversations, and we have not had room to run things through the city attorney's office and figure out exactly what we can or can't do on that front. So for this meeting, I think making comments that we have, and there's room to also have a second round after the round robin so people can chime in to if they heard something that they really want to lend their voice to from someone who went before them. So that's sort of, for this meeting's sake, that's the mechanism we have available. And I will keep looking into other options for future meetings and next time we do the CIP.
Okay. Knowing there's going to be a lot more discussion and I will more than likely end up wanting a second round, I'll yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you. Councillor Groves, to be followed by Councillor Zelenka.
Thank you, Chair. I really don't have anything to add at this point, other than I just wanted to kind of comment. It seemed like there was some discussion about potentially limiting airport expansion or traffic. All that will accomplish is it'll push people to drive to Portland like they used to do. And that's also adding to GHG emissions. So I just hope we kind of keep focused on common sense things that we can do to make a difference, but still meet the needs of our community. That's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelenka, followed by Reina. You're muted. Councillor Zelenka, you're muted.
Sorry, I just wanted to concur with what Randy said. You got to think of the whole picture in a lot of these different projects. What happens if you don't expand the airport? People don't fly. Some might, but most of them will just drive to Portland, which is actually an increase in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we do. Second is, it was my motion several years back that to have the CIP show how it promotes the climate recovery ordinance and how they work together. And the first time we got a report back kind of showed the crosswalk between climate change and what was happening in the CIP. And then we started to get, as we progressed, we got quantification of some of the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And then we started to get specific projects that were actually targeted towards greenhouse gas emissions and the integration of that kind of thinking into all of the different projects that are happening in the CIP. And this time we're kind of nearly at integrated CIP with that kind of thinking. So there's still more work to do, obviously, but I just wanted to applaud staff in how far we've come in that thing. I know it's been a lot of work, a lot of discussion, and a lot of hard questions asked and a lot of tough things to figure out. But I think our CIP does that better than probably any in the whole country. And because we've been thinking about it the most, and we've got some really bright people thinking about it. So I just wanted to compliment staff on how that far they've gone and how much we've done in that regard. The second one is that I guess I just wanted to make sure, especially to the new folks on the committee, that one of the things I learned, I think it's my 26th or 7th budget for the city of Eugene, is that there's no such thing as money without strings attached to it. The closest thing we have that come to that is probably general fund money, but even that has a lot of strings attached to it because of the way it's structured. When something's in a fund, you can't just pick it up, move it over here, and use it over here. There's a lot of rules around that, so it's very siloed. And so there's very little budget actually that can be moved around and be used for different things. And so that's the general fund. And when we get revenue hits on property taxes or assessed values, it's the general fund that takes that hit. And what gets funded in the general fund? Fire, police, central services, parks, libraries, all the things that everybody wants, except for the central services. Everybody thinks that should go away, but it's impossible. You still need to have accountants and procurement people. And so we just need to be cognizant of how the budget gets put together and how the little actually is movable around within it.
Thank you.
In this particular budget, I think that's really clear about that. But also, I just wanted to make sure that I said I support the CIP as proposed.
Thank you. Reina, followed by Eliza.
I don't have any questions other than what John from Ward 3 brought up about the economic development being part of the qualifying criteria. Just wanted to bring that up once again to see if this is the place we dig into that, or if that is something for a future conversation to see how valid that statement was. Is it actually a part of the current qualifying criteria, and what would need to be done to make it part of it in the future? But otherwise, I think this is a great path forward for the city of Eugene, and just look forward to getting some of that clarified.
Ty, I could just comment on that. I actually thought that was an interesting idea of just what's in the criteria. So I want to circle back with our team and just talk about that a little bit. I also wanted to take the opportunity to let this group know that the expansion of infrastructure to the Clear Lake area is actually one of the council's legislative priorities for this session, recognizing exactly what John was saying, that we have a lot of economic land that's intended for jobs that's not served, just like we do with the Clear Lake that you saw for housing. So that's actually something we're working on actively. But the idea of including that in criteria was intriguing to me, to be more explicit about it.
Thank you. Eliza, followed by Zach.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who worked to put the CIP together. It is always a really informative and helpful document. Also, thank you for providing the update on eWeb and City Hall. I didn't see any information about that major capital project in the document, but I have been assuming that's because when the CIP is usually done, it includes the projects that are fairly firm. And at the time this document was put together, the plans surrounding that seemed a bit fuzzier than they seem now. I know the CIP forms the basis of the next capital budget that we'll be looking at in May. Will the capital costs expected for the City Hall be included in that full budget, even if they didn't make it into the CIP? Or is there going to be some sort of supplemental budget process? Like, how does that get folded into this?
I can speak to that. So, we're looking at what those capital costs are right now. And so with our CIP budget, just every year there are certain categories that can be applied to different projects that aren't always, like CRO projects aren't always identified specific projects, but we look for opportunities. So like with the City Hall project, those will be things that we'll look at in future years where we could, like LED lighting upgrades are a really good example where it hasn't been done, but we could actually do that work and save money and energy costs when we do it. And so, and you're right, the City Hall project, there wasn't a lot of, that was prior, the CIP was developed prior to that building being under consideration. And so we're having that conversation now about what that looks like going forward. As far as capital improvements and things like that. Hopefully when we move in, we're using, the City Hall funds helping fund improvements right now, which is one of those dedicated funds I spoke about that's been set aside for the project. And so we're going to leverage those dollars to do some improvements to the building, so our future capital costs won't be as significant as they would be if we just were handed the building today without any improvements at all. Does that answer your question?
I think it does a little bit, but maybe a better way to put it forward. You mentioned that the projects that could be funded out of the bond that recently passed also weren't in the CIP. Does that mean that we have to wait until we have another CIP 2 years from now, or can we start allocating money and working on those projects and including them in future budgets, even if they didn't get included in the CIP because of the timing issues?
I think I would defer. I mean, that's probably an exec conversation with the city manager on how we would incorporate that into the CIP mid-year. I think, one thing that we often are able to do is prioritize projects even in the moment. So we could say, well, maybe we need to do something at the new building and hold off on another project going forward. It doesn't mean the project doesn't get completed, but it might take another year to do that. So we do a pretty good job about balancing those projects and the priorities as we go forward. So I feel pretty confident we can manage anything with a facility until the next CIP comes up and where we need to take a look at, what those funding levels are.
So I could also answer a little bit, because your question about the bond that was passed in 22 and how do we have to wait for another CIP to actually recognize that and add projects. So typically, and this also goes for like new grants that we get awarded that weren't in this current CIP. Once we identify those projects, and we're going to be starting a project or a process to identify the active transportation projects that were approved under the bond. As we identify those projects, we typically, or we get grant funding, we'll typically do that through the supplemental budget process to recognize that revenue and those project costs if we have them come up before the next CIP.
Okay, and so, yes, thank you. So just to make sure I'm understanding, the project list that we see in this document is the project list that will end up in the budget. And even though we know that there are other capital projects going on that are not included in this document, and that we would see information about those capital projects in supplemental budgets and future CIPs, even though I'm assuming that we're not gonna, we have the funding for City Hall, it sounds like, and so it's not going to get listed as a project that we're actively working on just because of the timing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you again for all of your work and your amazing presentations.
Thank you. Zach will be followed by Councilor Leach.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff again for a really high quality document. A work. I think there are some gaps, specifically like in the Bethel community. I really wish we had a longer process to discuss and learn about and decide on this document than the one night that we're dedicating to it. To loop back to my earlier questions, just wanted to say on the HVAC replacement, thank you. I'm glad that is already the internal city policy that we're planning on doing replacement at time of system replacement, fuel switching at time of system replacement. I think that's a really good idea. If that's ever not going to be the case, I hope we'll get a red flag that a specific project is not going to meet those criteria. With regards to airport visioning, my hope is that not to stop the expansion. As we grow into from a small to a medium to a larger city, I think we're going to need that capacity. I'm just hoping that we can be as forward thinking and in as much of a leadership role on looking at how we can support electrification and other alternative fueling, zero emission fueling options as those options are developed, and that we can also support EV charging at the airport as those opportunities arise. When we last spoke, there was going to be a gas station going into the airport, and there was talk of, we'll need to do EV charging through another project. So I look forward to having that conversation at some point. Jumping to a couple of questions. When last we spoke, we talked about the need for a revenue committee. I was really hoping we would get a chance to talk about revenue before we have to make substantial cuts. Is there any sort of a timeline on when that proposal is going to go to council for approval? Is there any chance we can start talking about these things before we have to make massive cuts, or is that just not feasible in terms of timeline?
I can speak to that. So council, the plan right now is that we are, Twyla and I, so our finance director and I will be presenting to council on February 27th, which will just be a really high level kind of financial update and also some ideas about a revenue committee. So that council will have that option in February. We're going to meet with you in March, early March, and we'll kind of go over that with you there. there's going to be in the budget, and what you'll learn on March 4th is there's kind of there's sort of revenue with a little r and revenue with a big R, kind of like Councilor Zelenka talks about affordable housing, little a, big A. There's going to be some revenue things built into our budget that are some of the smaller items that we know we can implement to help. And then there's sort of the big R discussions about bigger gaps that you won't be able to achieve by July. So I think you have a little bit of time. We've been really working hard to try to create a process that allows you some time to do that. So more on that, I think February 27th and March 4th.
Great. Thank you. And I'll just encourage council to hopefully grab that opportunity by the reins. I really hope we can talk about how to stop, some of these cuts, the worst ones before they happen, if we can, buy some of them down. And then obviously there are key priorities around homelessness and climate change that we obviously are not fully funding right now. Is it possible to pull up this transportation slide from the that we started going over, or that was in the presentation? The transportation map of where the projects are?
Yes, I can pull that up. Just give me 1 second to find the slide.
Thanks. So I live out in Bethel. I'd just like to speak to, Lynn Woodrich's comments about the need for walking and biking projects in Bethel. There aren't any identified in this CIP. There weren't any identified in the last CIP. In terms of the projects mentioned, there's a serious need for traffic calming on some of our streets. Right now, we only dedicate $100,000 a year to traffic calming. So I think that's a place we should revisit in the future. And then there are 2 specific projects around the West Eugene wetlands to create a connection for the local community, for folks that live north of Royal Road to get safely to the West Eugene wetlands, which would create a great connection from all the way from Jerry's essentially to the fairgrounds via the West Eugene, via the Fern Ridge Path and the Jessen Path if we filled in this small gap. And obviously there's the idea to do a path to Fern Ridge, which if anybody goes out to the West Eugene wetlands, it would be great to go farther out. And so just to say, I really, really hope the next CIP doesn't have a big gap in the West Eugene area around Bethel. And I just look forward to engaging in the update to allocate bond funds later this year to active transportation project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Leach, to be followed by Siobhan.
Hi there. I don't have too much to add to the conversation. My first budget committee meeting. So I'm still getting kind of integrated into this process. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone involved in making this CIP. I can tell how much work has went into it. It's very impressive. And I'm also hearing some things that are coming up from the committee, some recommendations. And I just want to say I'm happy to continue having those conversations and bringing that up, to council. Sorry. My little ones joining us tonight at the budget committee as well. So I just want to say thank you again. I'm happy to continue this process.
Thank you, and welcome to our guest as well. Next is Siobhan, to be followed by Councilor Keating.
Thanks, Chair. And as usual, a lot to process. I don't have any specific
questions on the PowerPoint at the moment. I'll dig into that deeper and send questions your way. One thing that did stand out to me, and this is just as being a citizen, is as we talk about these projects that are going to span years, decades, how are we looking at them with an equity lens? Like, are we looking in the areas that have been traditionally underserved? Are we focusing on areas where maybe the need is greater, even though we were just working on it last year? There was a lot of information, and maybe by reading deeper through it, I can answer this question myself. But as I listened, I didn't really hear any focus about like how, oh, well, we're doing these storm drains because in the past this place is traditionally flooded, or something along those lines. And then the other thing that I was kind of interested in knowing more about, which could be a question for a later time, is how it's starting to tie in with the housing implement pipeline, I think HIP. That can be more questions that I can follow up with later. But that was one thing as I was watching the presentation, there was so much detail, but it didn't really necessarily focus on like the individual communities or the areas that they're serving with priority not being served before. So thank you.
If I could just respond, that I'll get you some more information about that. There is a lot of detail in the CIP, and that's touched on in the project selection and prioritization process. So there's some sections in the CIP in each service area about that, but I can also provide you some more information or detail on that, how that's taken into account in our projects.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
I can also add the recreation and parks bond projects. We spent a lot of time thinking about equity around the community and where those projects were focused. And so one of the first projects we worked on was Echo Hollow Pool. And I know parks did a lot of planning around that as well with their park renovation projects.
Thank you. Next, I have Councillor Keating to be followed by Ryan Konofsky.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. Right out of the gate, I do want to echo Zach Mulholland's observation that council and this budget committee could in the community at large could benefit greatly if this conversation were extended next time the CIP is in front of us by at least another meeting to promote or encourage either greater public participation or additional dialogue and debate. So I just want to recognize and applaud that observation. Number two, I am interested in the stormwater conversation, the not only the fees collected and ultimately where those dollars go. I think there's a real opportunity for public education around that piece. And finally, I'm rather interested in the airport's charge in regards to lowering greenhouse gas and being more efficient with a lens and an eye for clean energy and reducing their carbon footprint. I have expressed heartburn from the dais about adding a gas station at the airport. I am interested in seeing how many new EV charging stations crop up at the airport and other creative things that our partners at the airport are doing to reduce their carbon footprint. I'll leave it at that. And I want to thank staff again for the time, and thanks to our Citizen Budget Committee members for participating.
If I may, Matt, can I respond to those comments? Is that allowable?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I will tell you that we are in the process of creating a new quick turnaround facility, which is in rental cars. We have added infrastructure for EV charging for their vehicles. We were going to add the charging stations ourselves, but the rental car agencies themselves actually said no, put the infrastructure in. We prefer to do that ourselves, so that's the path we took. We also put in EV charging infrastructure in our parking lot infrastructure, our parking lot expansion. And so anticipating that we were going to add EV charging capabilities, we are in regular conversations with our industry colleagues of what's the best practice for adding EV charging into an airport parking situation. There's a lot of dialogue of what's going on. So we're trying to learn best practices of what other people are doing and make sure that we do it right when we spend the money to put it in. And so we're very involved in making sure that we are an industry leader in not only EV charging, but alternative fuels, both for our buildings and also being on the forefront of being able to add those capabilities to our airlines when they ask for them.
Thank you. I appreciate the follow-up.
Thank you. Next, Ryan Kanofsky, followed by myself.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Great job by the presentation, because I had a bunch of stuff I just kept crossing off as these questions came up, because you all did a fantastic job of covering them. A couple things I was just, for interest, I was really paying attention to is the looking at the useful life plans and making sure that we're keeping a forward-thinking eye on that. And if anyone has any more information about that, just for curiosity's sake, I think that's really interesting to see how we're thinking far ahead, especially as we know that we are just getting building materials and ways of building that are so much cleaner and better for our communities, the environment, and everything else. But there was some great stuff in there. And then talking about tree canopy improvement too, just think about the same thing as we're really looking to invest in that. I was glad to see that in there. That we just need to keep adding trees. It helps cool down our cities and it helps capture greenhouse gases. And so I think that's one of the things I'm really interested in making sure we're doing those investments that don't cost a lot to help keep our community healthy and clean and safe. Similar to Councilor Keating's comment about wastewater, but I was more interested in seeing, and I couldn't find it here, and I apologize for not asking the question, but talking about looking at green infrastructure plans and ways that we can start thinking about that for wastewater. I know there's this kind of the gray versus green infrastructures, and I'd love to see us be more proactive in thinking about how we can invest in those systems that are both natural systems or ways that can help really reduce the cost of cooling water and cleaning water and things like that, and let just kind of our great ecosystems do what they can. But overall, staff did a great job and answered a ton of my questions as we went along.
Thank you. I absolutely want to echo everything positive that's been said about the document itself and the presentation tonight. I really appreciate the work of staff, and the work that's been put in has really headed off a tremendous number of questions. And I don't really have anything I need to ask at this stage. I do want to note that the transportation map really did have a stark gap when we look back at that in Western Eugene. And that is something that I would like to see more on. I also know projects in the pipeline versus identified projects is a little bit complicated, and we touched on some of that earlier as well. But other than that, absolutely, I was really happy with everything that I've seen in the document. I absolutely support it. And so that's where I am at the moment. I would like to invite our favorite guest, Mayor Vinnis, to chime in if she wishes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair. I loved this presentation. It's such an interesting document, and I'm so interested in the details that are provided and the map. So I really want to thank you again, both for the document and the presentation, and appreciate everyone on the Budget Committee actually for the questions you've asked. I don't have any additional questions. I think it's I was very interested in the opening comments by John Borowski about using economic development as one of the criteria. So I will be interested as the manager kind of thinks about that, what that might look like, because that feels like an interesting potential for us. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Was there anyone who needed a second round?
Chair, may I speak to the comments about transportation mapping in Bethel briefly?
Absolutely.
So I appreciate the comments on that, and it does look like an awkward lack of projects in that area. I do want to just comment that when we look at our transportation project list, many of these projects are driven by the remaining work that we have in the 2017 paving bond, right? So we've done a number of those projects. They were citywide. For one reason or another, we try to clump them together into larger projects. And I think that's one of the reasons it looks like there's a little bit of a gap, is really the remaining projects are outside of Bethel. We've done a lot of those already, like Royal Avenue, the substantial improvements around Beltline and adding active transportation that were done in the past. Others are, bridge seismic repairs or safety projects where there's specific criteria they have to meet. And we are literally looking at the number of crashes and other criterias that are set by the state or the federal government to get funding. And it just raises some projects score better than others, and that can drive some of the investments we have. Also, there are a number of projects in the list that are buckets instead of discrete projects. You'll see an active transportation project funded by street bond, traffic calming, other things. We don't typically put the specific projects of those in the bond, so it doesn't mean that there's not work that will or could happen in Bethel. The new bond, the 2022 bond that was just passed, will add about $5.5 million of paving projects in the CIP period to Bethel. And as Zach mentioned, there's a real opportunity of investment in Bethel area for the $15 million in walking, biking, safety, and street tree projects. Bethel is one of the areas that our urban forestry team is really focused on as far as trying to improve the urban forest when we look at our overall canopy cover. So that will really be a great candidate for investment as well. So just wanted to bring a few of those things up.
Thank you. I really appreciate that addition. I am not seeing, Eliza.
Seeing nobody requesting a second round, I move to recommend that the CIP as presented be presented to City Council with the inclusion of the record of meeting minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor. Please keep your hands up for a moment. The city staff had an opportunity to get votes recorded?
Yes.
Excellent. That passes. Thank you. With that completed, we now have a brief presentation from Vicky on the Budget Committee terms. Councilor Zelenka? Or is that just still your hand vote?
Yeah, sorry, bad management.
So there's, with the transition to a 2-year budget cycle, there's a modification to the way Budget Committee terms are being done, and we're going to hear a little about that now.
Good evening, Vicki Silvers, Assistant Finance Director. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to hear why we're doing this and kind of explain a little bit more about it. I've sent it in a couple of emails what the terms will look like, but just some background. ORS kind of rules how we do our budget and actually Budget Committee makeup and all of the things that have to do with Budget Committee. And it says if the organization adopts a biennial budget, then the terms need to be 4 years for Budget Committee. And in speaking with the city attorney, we realized that since you all will be recommending a biennial budget, now in this process, as we get into April and May, it made sense that you should be serving a 4-year term, which is why we're extending it. So that's the first part of it. I wanted to let you know that piece of it. We have a public hearing on the 22nd as a part of our adoption of an ordinance. We have to have a public hearing. The ordinance will be adopted in March, on March 13th, and that will help change the code that is pertaining to budget committee terms. It's spelled out there too. And so we'll align that with the ORS as it's always been. So, and that really is it. So we've extended everybody's term a year, nothing else will change in the process. If somebody like Catherine Ryan vacates their position, we will go through a recruitment just like we normally do. Nothing has really changed, and the person who fills that position will fill the remainder of that term. So I don't know if that's confusing or if people don't understand we want to do this, or if you have questions about it, I'm here to answer that. Didn't think it would be a big deal, but it does change your commitment. So if you have thoughts about that, just reach out to me and we can talk about it. That's all I had.
Great, thank you so much. Next on our agenda is minutes approval. Minutes from the December 7th meeting were sent out. Did anyone have any recommended changes or comments to those? And hearing none, does anyone have a motion to approve those minutes?
I move to approve the minutes from the December 7th meeting, unless Raina would like to instead.
I'll take the motion from Eliza, second from Raina. All in favor of approving the December 7th minutes?
Got it. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you. And with that, we move to the final piece of our main agenda for today, which is the election of officers, as it is a new year for the Budget Committee. So do we have a nomination for Budget Committee Chair?
I'll nominate Ty Prue-Sitterman for Budget Committee Chair.
Second.
Thank you. Do we have any other nominees for Chair? Thank you very much. I absolutely accept the nomination and look forward to the opportunity to serve another year in this role. Can we all vote on approving me as chair? All in favor?
That was a lifetime appointment.
Well, we'll see where it goes, 1 year at a time. Thank you. And do we have any nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Eliza Kaczynski.
Second.
Do we have any other nominations for vice chair? Hearing none, all in favor of Eliza as vice chair? Last one I did for. Wonderful, thank you very much. More things change, the more they stay the same, right? Okay, thank you so much. With that, we are on to wrap up. Our next meeting is coming up on Saturday, March 4th at 9:30 a.m. at the Campbell Community Center, not on Zoom. So that is the meeting where we'll be hearing our financial condition update, and we'll be getting a preview of the 2023 to 25 proposed budget. Yes, City Manager?
You can. I just was going to speak to that when you're done.
That was the end of my text.
I was also going to throw in the maybe we'll propose a 4-year budget, and then you can stay for another extra year.
I didn't see that option in ORS, but hey, let's have fun with it, right?
So we'll say more about this on Saturday, but I did want to kind of pre-thank you for a Saturday. I know that's a big ask, and we haven't been in person, but as as the team and as we've been kind of completing the overall budget package, it just feels like there's so much happening with the gap and the strategies that we need more time. And I want you to feel like you have enough time to review it, ask questions, and let us know what more information you're going to need as we get into the more formal part of the process. So I know it's a big ask, but I think in the end, it will be a really good investment of all of our time to just have more shared knowledge.
Thank you. Did you have something to add, Siobhan?
Yes, as someone who is immunocompromised and is just always worried about going into places with gatherings, is there any sort of masking or separate, like any distancing that we may be doing in this space that I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person in?
I think we could follow up with you and find out what will feel right and appropriate and make sure we can accommodate that.
Thank you. And then in addition to that March 4th meeting, of course, there's then at the end, late April, we have our formal budget presentation followed by our series of meetings in May to work through the process. And you should have all seen save the dates for those meetings sent out in the past few days. So we can plan ahead for all of that. But with that for tonight, that means we've concluded our business and can adjourn at 7:28 p.m. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you.